I just had one quick question.
Would you like to hear?
Keep it broad, episodic, and
Very slack.
I don't think anyone's budgeting anything because there's nothing.
The business has a business model.
So I think the approach that we're going to take here, and it was a really fun challenge having these sessions with Sam, because we were trying to reduce the essentials and the essential pointers on pitching to a universal enough distillation that it applied equally to film and television. So again, there will be some I think qualifiers, caveats, things that Sam chimes in and says on behalf of the film team, things that I say, well, in television, here's the expectation. But we really tried to make it universal enough such that it kind of applied in both worlds. But the format of this will be kind of Sam and I kind of adding those qualifiers. But the first one that we want to make clear is that this is an art form. It's not a science. There's, I think, plenty of people, and we can get into this in other slides as well. There's plenty of people that will prescribe the exact formula, the exact sequence. There's like Netflix, for instance, has like the order in which they want to hear these things. Warner Brothers has like a checklist that you have to satisfy in order. So we're not going to be putting those forward. A lot of those elements are incorporated in kind of what we've distilled this down to and what we're going to talk about. But we philosophically are not taking the approach that has to be any one thing. I think like these productions, like how the productions come together, no two are the same. And I think that applies for pitches. No two are the same, each are unique as the project should be. And that's kind of one of our guiding philosophies through this discussion.
And I would say too, and one of these things too, in terms of art and science, I think in science, if you do follow the instructions, you'll get that result because that's what it is. I think for pitching as well, there's obviously the factors in terms of coming at it and being prepared, which we'll talk through, but also so much of it is just in terms of timing, in terms of how is that person feeling on a given day, in terms of, how are you catching them at a certain time? Are they, at that moment where they're ready to go and pull the trigger and buy something and they're looking for something new, or all these other factors. So I think for us, again, it's going to just be walking you through the ways in which, you're set up for success. And then there's some things that are in control and out of control. And that's just how it is.
All right, let's go to the next slide. Okay, so we talked a little bit about how this is not going to be prescribing a formula or a sequence. The other thing just to also add is for the purposes of this discussion, we will be talking about the final pitch, the pitch to a buyer, the pitch to either a television network or a film studio. At least speaking on behalf of television, there are a lot of interim pitches and interim steps. A lot of times, if you're a writer with a nascent idea and you're pitching to a producer and you're trying to put together the team of people that is eventually going to go out, we can talk about some of that in the Q&A, just in terms of like, hey, I want to pitch my idea to a producer to build a team. Like, how much do I have to have ready? Like, let's save that for the Q&A if you want to know more about that. I think what we want to talk about, just again, for the ease of the discussion, is like, this is the final pitch, the pitch that after which, hopefully, if successful, you are, given a check or a commission or whatever, and you're off and you're executing kind of what you said you were going to. And the other qualifier that we can talk about later on, if it applies to any of you specifically, is like, okay, well, what if I'm pitching a project based on a piece of material that's already been written and already been read, and it's the pilot spec that I've sent out there, and I just want to come in and talk about the series. Like, we can also kind of talk about that later if you have questions specifically about how that may apply to your situation. But again, just because there's so many different permutations and circumstances, we're just talking about like the final product verbal pitch that these elements and components probably apply in almost cases, even if we are talking about, a pitch that follows with a piece of material, a series deck, I don't know what it would be in film if that ever happens in film, but that's kind of what it would be for TV. One of my things that I love is finding references in other media, in other spheres, in other industries, and applying like lessons from those to what we do, to entertainment, to film and TV. And one thing that I regard as a kind of a sacred text of sorts is William Zinser's On Writing Well. William Zinser is a journalist. He's a nonfiction writer. There was a stretch of time when I was basically I would just buy a copy of this book for my assistants because he covers the approach of writing. And I think there's a great deal of writing in everything that we do, even if we're not writers. If we're producers, we're directors, we're editors. It's like writing is such an elemental part of the creative process. And this book in particular, I feel like there's some principles that apply nicely to our business, but there's 4 principles in particular, the four elements of good writing that Mr. Zinser identifies that I think have some pretty interesting application to the pitch process. So those are 4 that I just want to quickly touch on. You can think of these as pointers. As a part of your preparation, you're taking the time to find the best and most accurate expression of the ideas you're trying to communicate. I think a part of this is also being mindful that you may have been sitting with this material for a long time, and the characters that you're talking about, the story that you're talking about, it's all become so ingrained and so embedded that you can, fall into the trap of using pronouns or being super kind of super rangy with like a lot of proper nouns and character names. And so this for me is just a reminder that you're probably presenting it to someone that's trying to hold all this information together. They're hearing it for the first time. Like some people, myself included, who are more visual and are hearing a verbal pitch. So this is just like really a suggestion to be as clear as possible when you're pitching. The next one is also related. Simplicity. This is not meant to. I don't think that the dramatic content inside your pitch needs to be simple, but it needs to be explained simply. In fact, the more complex and complicated, the relationships, the character dynamics, the storytelling, all of that can be, the better. But in terms of the most successful expression and communication of it, I think you want to be simplistic in how it's conveyed, so that you don't. I feel like being on the other end of pitches, I've unfortunately tuned out when someone's getting so kind of complex and in the weeds. It's like, just if you're always coming back to what is the essential dramatic truth I'm trying to express here, and kind of again allow the complication to be a result of many kind of simply expressed components be kind of the result. And then brevity. This is an easy one, but it can't go understated. I don't know if we have to put a number to it, but I think like in that 20 to 25 minute range, that's where you want to be living. I think. I mean, there's obvious exceptions to this. Like that's a target. Like, it's not to say that no pitch that's been 35 minutes is never succeeded. We have our Jigsaw series is a great example of the conceit behind Jigsaw is basically a revenge and heist story told over a 30-year time span, in which the episodes will be kind of scrambled on the Netflix interface. So the pitch process for that show was having the executives on the buying side play the game. So they kind of selected episodes out of order to see how they felt about character and story. And there's really no other way of presenting that than basically breaking the entire season and allowing for the game to be played. So those, like, I mean, poor Eric Garcia, like he did his damnedest, but like I feel like those were like almost hour-long pitches. And look, we had a very successful result, but that's like a special case because of the special identity of the show. For most things that are not a scrambled watch out of order show for Netflix, you really want to keep it concise. And then humanity is Zinser's last kind of principle of good writing, and the way that I would kind of apply that here is, I don't think it means earnestness. Like, I mean, that doesn't mean that you can't be earnest, but I think conversely, like I've seen writers do kind of like the glib and snarky version, and if calibrated correctly, that's also very accessible. I think the way that I apply it to the pitch process here is like, you know, again, as I was saying on a past presentation, like you're pitching to other humans, and you know, a place like Netflix may ultimately take that, reduce it to kind of tags and run it through an algorithm. But for the most part, you're trying to make a humanistic appeal to someone. And so I feel like sincerity, enthusiasm for material, like those are things that I think the people on the other side of the pitching table are very kind of like they're very attuned to, and they can tell when someone feels like, oh, this is like cynically assembled and they're trying to like tick some boxes, versus when it's like, this is a story that I need to tell. And you know, I want to take you on this journey, or I want you to feel the things that I feel when thinking about it. So it's like, this is, and we can talk kind of, you know, as a part of the pitch elements, where and how this can be best applied. But I really feel like it's an important part. You know, I think when we hear pitches from writers, like, you can just tell who's really psyched about it and who's just looking for a paycheck. And so that would be, and the other thing that's difficult to this is because, you know, we beat the drum of preparation and kind of, you know, practicing and doing your thing. You very well may be one of those people where after you've kind of rehearsed the pitch 3,000 times, you lose a little bit of that emotion. And this is something that you'll learn about yourself as you kind of go through it. But like, you know, you may have to prepare in a way where you know everything inside and out, but you're not scripting it so that you feel like it's not getting lost. It doesn't feel canned. Again, that's kind of like a modulation that you'll have to work on with your partners and know about yourself. But yeah, humanity, important one. Okay, so those are just the prism through which now we can talk about more the parts of the pitch. And again, these are, some are like in common sense order, and then others, I think you can really kind of talk about, well, what's the right sequence for film or TV or for your project, or you know, if it's led by a script or not. But these are the parts that we're gonna talk about that we've kind of reduced it down to, and there's plenty of ways that you could do it or break it down differently, but this is after kind of, you know, a couple of weeks worth of discussion, what we thought was kind of a fair breakdown. All right, so setting the table. This is just kind of the brief. I think the way that Sam and I were talking about it is like, think about this as the bridge from the small talk portion of a gathering, be it virtual, in person, or whatever, into the meat of the creative idea. Again, because we're talking about this being kind of the final product, and maybe that assumes that you've amassed a team and you were not just the only individual pitching. Let's say you're out with a producer or a filmmaker or someone else. I think this is typically when your producing partner would give kind of their little preamble, set the table, which is, you know, refreshing on hey, here's who everyone is on our side. Here's, how we all know each other, the origins of how the project came together. Again, it's something that should be brief. It should be potent. And also just as a reminder, it's like, and this is a bit of more of a practical or logistical thing, but it's like, you're pitching to a studio, you're pitching to a network, you're one of potentially many other pitches that place is hearing on that given day. You'd like to think that yours was special and stood out, and because they said, yes, we want to hear that, they know who you are, they know what the idea is, they're excited to hear it, they've already done their homework on who everyone is. Like that's not a fair assumption. That's obviously ideal. But I think this, again, setting the table is the opportunity to kind of reset everyone, refresh everyone's mind, hear the people involved. Sam, anything else to
I think that's perfectly right. I think it's just realigning them so that they're in the present and they realize what they're hearing and who everyone is. And hopefully with that too, they'll understand the, importance of hearing it and why they might want to take it on. So again, it is to, I think it's usually the producer who would sort of, align everyone in that way, and even mention in terms of specific mandates that they may have had that this would fit into a specific box for them. And then, at that point, then we would sort of hand it over to you to sort of get into. And this could be something too, whereby, the next slide as well is something that the producer can sort of lean into as well, because they might have some elements to it as well in terms of that initial sort of, quick overview as to what it is. And then at the same time too, then, the writers will get into it and, or the filmmaker and go from there. So I can just keep going too. So even just the overview as well, even in terms of the snapshot or the synopsis of it, I think some of it is, explaining sort of what this is, whether it's a film about, whatever that topic may be. And then obviously the prescience as to why it should be made. And at the same time too, if there is a specific connection to whether it's a specific event or a certain thing, that there would be that connection to, again, leaning into that humanity that Clayton mentioned, as well as to why we like it and why it would be a good fit for them to lean into and why audiences would essentially like that. And so it's a quick snapshot to sort of orient themselves and sort of let them dig in to sort of have their mind know essentially what they're getting into in the next, 20 to 30 minutes.
And then one kind of like just TV qualifier, and this is where, again, kind of like the notion of a sequence kind of muddles things a little bit. It's possible, I'm just even thinking about the project we're working on with Mondi. It's like, it's possible that kind of the essence of a show is either autobiographical or informed, like the show is about the lead character, and as a part of this overview, or this overview kind of being a bridge into everything else, it's possible then, like if you were pitching Breaking Bad, like you would, in this overview section, like it would be impossible not to talk about Walter White and his circumstances and kind of his arc. So we'll kind of get into the next elements that kind of concludes with character. But I did want to point out that obviously certain television shows are defined by their lead character. And so in that overview, it's possible that you would be hitting kind of like the central, dilemma or conflict for that person, such that it defines the series. But anyway, let's go on to the next element.
I saw a hand go up.
Yeah, go ahead.
Question.
Yes.
Clayton, if I could just ask, just at the setting of the table, so to speak, and the overview, in many respects, the point that you raised is really important about not just ticking the boxes, but in a sense, what you're doing is you're actually creating the emotional space that you want These people to enter. You're conjuring this, and you're identifying the personal and the humanity that you bring to it is what's going to draw them into that space and get on board your vehicle and go on this narrative journey, or this journey of discovery with you in a way.
By the way, thank you for that, because I think that's so true, and something to be conscientious of, because, as I was saying, the thing about like, you could be one of many pitches in a day, it's like, and this also kind of speaks to the the reality of a human being on the other side of this. It's like people come in there, they're thinking about the last phone call they had, they're thinking about what's ahead on their schedule, and season's so bright. It's like you have to create the environment, create the space, create the opportunity for them to put all of their other baggage and all the places where their mind wants to go aside, and get them to just draw them into the story that you're about to tell, and so that you can hopefully keep them there, and they're not, again, like thinking about all the calls they have to return or whatever it is. They're there with you. So 100% agree.
And very, very often you share the inciting incident as well, so to speak.
Totally. I mean, that's the other, I guess it's the other kind of qualifier on the television side. I mean, and if we were running through like, hey, this is how Warner Brothers wants you to pitch, their pitches all start with the teaser. They all start with the opening of your series, which is again, something we can talk about as a possibility. They prescribe it, which I feel like is okay. Then it just puts a lot of onus and pressure on creating a teaser that defines the series, which isn't always how things should begin. And I get that it's just like a sales tool, but yes, there's also a case to be made for just like, okay, I want to go in there and tell the most compelling story and just grab them right away. And I have this amazing kind of, scene in a movie or opening scene in a television show that just is going to be my best way of pulling everyone in. That's also a possibility. And we can talk more about that if people are interested. But let's go on.
I have a quick question.
Yes.
In the overview section, is that also where you sort of say why specifically you're pitching to them as opposed to somewhere else? Would you also mention that then?
It's a very good question. I mean, there's part of me that feels like, yes, if it feels organic and not, I don't love it when it feels calculated and look, we're definitely living in an era as we've kind of discussed with, the past presentations about the kind of the streaming landscape, the buying landscape out there. A lot of these places are becoming a bit more niche. There used to be a time, I think when I started here a decade ago, where you could have a television pitch that could theoretically satisfy, 10 or 11 stops, and you wouldn't have to do anything to the pitch, right? To specialize it to that network. They're all just kind of looking for, something new and fresh but their mandates were kind of broad enough that, again, you didn't really have to customize the pitch or the presentation. I think it's a good idea, but I think the caution I would raise is that it feels like a little calculated. Like if your story and your pitch is just undeniably qualitatively good, then that is the priority. Trying to kind of, I think, having been on the network side before, I worked at FX before I worked here. And when people would come in and say, like, this is why it's perfect for you guys, I would occasionally be resistant because I'm like, well, with all due respect, you don't know the conversations we're having inside about what we want, what we need, and what our evaluative metric is. Maybe I was being, maybe that's the wrong view to take as a buyer, but I feel like there were other people out there that had that same kind of thing. My attitude was like, just tell me the best possible story and let us evaluate whether or not this makes sense for us, given kind of what we have on the development slate, on our air, what we're looking for. And I feel like if a producer, we've also been in an instance where we're like AMC, when we were in a deal with those guys, they said, hey, go out and find us a World War II show. And we said, aha, we will. And then we brought in a pitch. And in that instance, we could, it would be appropriate to say, you guys asked for, this very specific kind of thing. We heard you and here we are. But I think if it's not satisfying some kind of specific request that the network has made of the creative team, then I think I'd personally probably caution against it.
Okay, cool. Thank you.
And I would say on the
Yes.
feature side, I think as a whole, I think a lot of it is the producer fully also knowing and talking before about the project as a whole in terms of knowing where it lives on a budget scale. You're going to know where to take it, and that's also going to inform why you're pitching a specific division of a studio or a specific executive who's looking for specific things in that way. So there would be definitely pre-vetting, and that's why they would know you would be going there on the film side. So obviously we would try and set you up for success in that way, to knowing that this is what they'd be looking for, and not something like, oh, this is too small, so like, why are you even pitching me this? You know, or it's too big, why are you pitching me this? So I think there is that sense of knowing even before and doing the homework and knowing what they're looking for, that, you know, that's why there would be a chance of them buying it.
That I'll just not to kind of bloviate further, but I think what I would probably do in that instance, Monday, is I would, as the producer, I would call the executive ahead of time, and I would do that kind of work before we were in the venue to kind of Seaton's point. It's like, I feel like it's not that it feels calculated, but it exists in an objective kind of on an objective plane that potentially could take you away from just kind of creating that storytelling sphere or just being inside the creative. And whereas like kind of that is a bit more like salesmanship that can happen outside of the pitch. And again, like as a producer, in addition to the briefest preamble, because like my also philosophy is like they want to be hearing from the writer. They want to be hearing from the person, at least on the television side. It's like, I want to be hearing from the person that's created this, that's potentially show running this, that's responsible for the execution week to week for the entirety of the series. I don't really want to be hearing from the guy from Scott Free. Like, I know the guy from Scott Free. He knows, like, he's got good taste. He knows how to produce these things. He may want to set the table, but like, I don't want to be hearing from him during the pitch. But where I probably do want to be hearing from him is before the pitch, the day before. Hey, I got this thing. Remember, this is why we're so excited to bring it to you. This is why I think it would be great. I think a lot of that can be addressed, but just not maybe in the pitch itself.
Thank you.
Mm-hmm. Tone. Sam, you want to talk about this one a little bit?
Yeah. So obviously, you know, again, this is even in part, I wouldn't say set a table, and this is something that can come in a way. It's to try and help them obviously sort of focus the lens to which they're knowing what they're going to get. So, you know, obviously different stories can be told different tonal ways, whether it's, you know, in a genre lens or more in a drama in a different way. And so you want to go and convey sort of in a way what that feeling is and what it's going to feel like for them. Obviously that's what tone is. And that's also something for the film too, in terms of, you know, is it going to go and change? Is it going to be more or less like along the same prism throughout? At the same time too, you know, in some ways this could have been done before, but even just to rephrase, it's like kind of like this film and that other, if it does feel like in that space, I think for as a whole, you're always trying to create your own specific tonal balance, which will separate it from other things. But in terms of actually trying to go and have them put their thinking cap on and knowing more or less where that story is going to live, I think that will help them sort of understand, you know, the feeling and what they're going to get out of it, because just so much of that is obviously a lot of that's filmmaker dependent, but at the same time too, you want them to realize and know, oh, this is a comedy or this is a dramedy or it's a horror piece or whatever these things are. And there's going to be flourishes of different other things perhaps in there. So just giving them a sense as to knowing what they're going to buy, because again, you're trying to go and sell them and you're trying to make it be as airtight as possible, whereby they're not leaving with so many questions at the end and they feel good about actually pulling the trigger. So this is just one element of it, but being clear about where you want it to live is very important.
And one of the easiest ways I feel like, at least on the TV side, but probably just equally on the film side, is if you have other reference points, film, TV, occasionally even books or other media that communicate that essence. This would be you would address that kind of like in a section talking about tone. And then I guess, you know, for the filmmakers here, or the people that would be going out with filmmakers, you know, I guess this could also give way to another kind of subcategory of just like, you know, the look and the feel, or there was like a stylistic approach that a director was wanting to apply to it. That would I think it could be a subcategory of tone or live kind of adjacent to it. So world, I mean, it's probably fairly self-evident. I mean, I think, at least just speaking to television, you know, it's like over the last decade, I don't know if you want to consider it like kind of from Game of Thrones forward, the idea of kind of world building, world creation, living inside of a world, exploring worlds or cultures or subcultures that haven't been seen before on television. It's obviously the capabilities to do it are there because the resources are there. And you know, anecdotally, I feel like when you're bringing a new world to someone, you know, it's either be it a chapter of history or again, like a subculture. I feel like, you know, that's if it can serve to make it feel distinct and unique and like something that you haven't, you know, encountered before, even a location, frankly, like I think being able to communicate that it is special and distinct and that it maybe even becomes a character unto itself. If you're talking about like a city or a region. So again, it's like that. I think in this kind of, at least in this age of television, it's something that's more on the table. I mean, when it was just like Stephen Bochco and Dick Wolf, like pitching cop shows, like you didn't really need to go into the world. It was like, oh, it's set in the Boston precinct, and then like, okay, whatever. Like, so anyway, and then on the film side, Sam, I don't know if there's anything beyond kind of the.
I think it's just trying to get the point across as to where it's going to live, and if it's something, you know, as extreme or out there as like Avatar, like that's a specific world, you know, or it's something just in a random city like, you know, The Town, which is in Boston, like just knowing that that's sort of, you know, present day and that's where it's taking place, and just sort of fully understanding, you know, the world around it. You know, I think in sci-fi, there's different, obviously, parameters as to how you would do that in terms of, you know, the rules and buy-ins and whatever that is, or just sort of, it's also just sort of, again, making sure that they know, you know, if there are things that are different from our current world, what does that look like? Whether it's the past, the present, the future, you know, you're just sort of making it clear that this is where it's going to live. And so I think in both settings, I think, you know, for film and TV, it's just you want it to be distinct and clear as to where it's taking place.
Cool. All right. So we kind of saved the meatiest ones for last, or maybe in some ways the most important, or the most broadly defined. But story. Sam, why don't you hit the essentials, and then I'm going to do a slight television kind of qualifier and deviation.
Yeah, I think they're different in this way because, you know, obviously in film, usually 3 acts, you know, beginning, middle, end. So, you know, you're going to go and tell who those specific main characters are about. Again, there's only 20 to 30 minutes to go and do all this. So, you know, you really have to go and sort of boil it down to go and follow who these people are, you know, and what's their journey, you know, what are they going to go and sort of come in the obstacles in their way, and how are they going to go and overcome it? And I think so many of these things too is, you know, knowing what those stakes are in the process. Is it life and death? Is it something that's a familial relationship? Is it, you know, something of their personal struggle that they need to get over? And so again, it's sort of that thing as to, you know, all these things work in tandem as to why someone's going to want to do it. But at the same time too, what makes you want to tune in and follow this person, whether you like them or you just love to hate them, you know, at the same time too, just knowing, you know, who these people are, and sort of at the same time too, like, why does it need to be made now? Like, what is it saying about our current society in certain ways? And what do you want to go and question the audience to leave when they end? So, you know, I think all these things sort of all are all part of the different elements of, you know, of the completion as to what it would be. But again, I think it's always just trying to go and find those stories. And again, even going back to the humanity of it all, why should we care? And why should we tune in and spend our time on this film? So, you know, we can sort of get into specifics maybe in the Q&A if there's certain other things, but from the macro standpoint, it's really walking them through the 3 acts as to what the story will be. And at the same time, too, sort of more of those macro storylines as for those main characters as to what they're going to be, because there's only so much time to do it. But at the same time, it's always about even those 4 points of story that Clay outlined as well in the beginning too, thinking about those ways to go and get through it in terms of brevity, but also getting to that distillation of the best idea as to where it's going. And then by the end, hopefully it's like, the goal is to obviously have them saying, I want to be in this, I want to know more, and let's flesh it out and let's do this thing together. So, again, it's really trying to just walk them through what that story is and what separates it from obviously everything else that they're hearing and they've heard as of late.
And then on the TV side, where it becomes a little bit more challenging or a little bit more, I think, specific to kind of TV captures so much, right? It's like we do TV TV shows that are limited series where, we're out with a 6 or an 8-parter and kind of seasonally take on more of that 3-act structure that Sam's talking about in film. And in those instances, like, again, like you have a definitive kind of beginning, middle, and end. You're taking people through it. There's also versions where it's like we have a returning series, but it's going to be X amount of seasons, and I have that all mapped out in my head as the creator, and so there could be that kind of shape and model, and then customarily, or at least kind of mostly what we were doing when I started here 10 years ago was the ongoing series, in which at the point of the pitch, you would probably know what happens. You would probably have a version of the pilot story, right? Like you would say, this is how we find our way into the world and how we encounter our characters. And here's kind of approximately where we end at the beginning of the first episode. And then the expectation would be that, you kind of would be able to kind of walk people through what the first season looked like, and then how it was sustainable for seasons beyond that. And to Sam's point, it's like it's a tall task to cover kind of that expansive terrain while also being brief. And so I kind of like to, for me personally, it's like pitches. I think there's a great opportunity in a television pitch to kind of incorporate the next slide that we don't have to go to right now. Characters, like, I think there's an organic way of introducing us to characters through a pilot story, and meeting those kind of characters in context versus some kind of separate, like, here's the descriptions and backstories of all the characters. Like, meeting them as they kind of interact and relate to one another, I think is always helpful, and also, so you're getting kind of a good taste of like how an episode would work if you're pitching the pilot story. Where I find pitches can really go off the rails is when they get so kind of obsessed with plot. And again, like you're spending 60 minutes telling people like every story beat for the first season. Like, I don't think that's required. Again, unless like, the kind of piece you're doing maybe factors in, like if you're doing a thriller, or like I said with the Jigsaw thing, you're doing something that, kind of the twists and turns and the double crosses and like all of that is such a part of it. There may be some exceptions. But I think what the buyer is just looking for is like, again, like, can I discern a shape, arcs for characters, an arc for the central character or the principal characters over the course of the first season. And to provide that shape, I really don't think you need a million plot points as much as like, again, just like a succinct and potent kind of description of a character arc or someone's journey over the course of the season. So this story is, again, like it's not necessarily plot. It's, plot being obviously kind of what is dramatized, story just being like what happens, that not necessarily all of it ends up on screen.
Again, I think it's still similar film and TV. Again, in the feature landscape, again, you're still pitching the 3 acts. So in terms of these characters, in terms of that opening, you're probably going to have them probably in film, you're probably opening on your lead generally. So, you know, you're going to sort of understand in that situation to whatever you're going to open the movie as, you know, their sort of backstory, which you're going to go and either be teased out or it's going to be told in a specific way as to how you do it. You know, you're going to understand sort of who they are, what sort of drives them, their motivations, choices, and obviously what, you know, their values are, whether you're going to love this person or you're going to dislike them, or they have their faults, but you love them nonetheless. And so, you know, from the beginning of the end, I think it's still trying to verify sort of where they are in the beginning, and then you're going to track them throughout as to obviously the goals that they've set for themselves or wherever the movie is going to take them through specific events and whatnot from their character arc. So from the beginning, where are they? And then where are they at the end? Sometimes either they'll succeed, they'll fail. Sometimes they'll succeed, but they didn't get the way they wanted. But usually there's going to be a character arc for these different people to go and say, like, why do you actually care about them? Why are these roles good? And I think so much to think about too is even when it gets to a time when actors want to go and play specific roles, it's like, what's the character arc? And sort of, do we follow them throughout? And sort of, how is that working not only in specific scenes, but also, you know, through the course of the film. So again, all this stuff is still interconnected in a way in terms of story and character, but it's, again, trying to go and, you know, create these specific people. Obviously the slide that is here from Royal Tenenbaums, obviously all these people are very quirky and eccentric, and they have their own sort of journeys and how they interact. So if you haven't seen this movie, I highly recommend it. But, you know, at the same time too, it's sort of eccentric group of people. But again, I think it's some of those things in terms of even in that way, it's like there's only so much real estate you have. So why do you care about this specific character and sort of what sets this person apart? And why would an actor or actress want to go and play this specific role? And again, that can be just from the specificity of a true life person or someone else, or those things that we haven't fully seen before. That's so much of the sell to go and saying, this can be the go and carrot to go and get that director or get that piece of talent because the character is so good. We haven't quite seen this person on screen. That's why you need to buy it. So it really is trying to convey, you know, all those things that would make this person attractive essentially to, you know, whether it's going to be an ongoing, you know, film series as to if it is someone that there's, you know, whatever, James Bond or whatever, you know, in that same way where why do you actually care about this guy and sort of living in that way, and you're creating a new franchise in that. That's also something to think about in terms of the pitch, in terms of this could be one of an ongoing film series in that way. But again, it is trying to go and hook them in that way to not only live in that world, but the characters as to who you're going to follow and why.
And on the TV side, again, at the risk of being like overly tidy or overly simplistic, I think character tends to be the reason that you return to something. Like obviously, you know, the concept, the world, the tone, the sensibility, those are things that hopefully bring you into the tent, and, you know, and you're clicking on that first episode. And again, maybe there's some great conceptual conceit, some kind of twist, some kind of convention, a new storytelling device that intrigues you such that you want to see how further episodes unfold. But for the most part, I think, with the exception of like procedurals and sitcoms, maybe, like we can talk about those separately if people want to know. But I think as a viewer, you're returning for character and the quality of character relationships, character dynamics, and as a part of the pitch, I think what people want to hear about, again, it's like, it's less, to put myself in the seat of the buyer, I want to hear less about all of the plot beats of a first season or the first episode. I would rather know the ways in which a character is experiencing their journey and how they're changing, how they're evolving. What are the decision points that they make? You know, I think the other kind of thing that's, I think, pretty much true given any format of television is people, I think, gravitate towards active characters, characters that are making decisions and, you know, through their decisions and the ramifications of their decisions, drama is resulting, and therefore interesting to watch, interesting to come back to. So I think if you're going into a pitch and you're not even necessarily sure where the story starts and stops for the first episode, even being able to provide like, this is where a character starts and this is, you know, the major decision point that they have to make in the episode, and how that decision may even potentially define the series or define kind of the trajectory of the character in the series, is a huge deal. And, you know, again, at the risk of kind of trafficking in tidy, like bad development notes. But I feel like when characters are passive, you're hearing about it a lot in the development process. Like when things are just happening to people through circumstance or convenience, and people are not kind of generating, are not making kind of active choices and decisions, it's just going to be inherently less interesting. So I kind of like to encourage our writers to always be thinking about like, what are those major decision points over the first episode, the first season, you know, where do they, to the extent that you don't know exactly how we get there, where does your principal character or your principal characters, where do they culminate? Where do they end when you're done telling however many years of this television show that you have in you? I feel like that's important to think about. And it's not always, again, this is getting someone on board to go into a development process, or maybe if you have a lot of material to order a writer's room, or maybe even the best case scenario, like a production commitment. So much of it can change, obviously. And we can go into the factors that bring about that change. You're never going to be held to it. I mean, if you pitch something so kind of amazing and awesome in terms of a character arc or a character journey, and it culminates in a crazy, surprising, and original way, and that's part of the reason why, you know, Apple bought your television show, and then you want to deviate from it. Maybe there's a creative battle to be had, but for the most part, you're projecting and trying to get people on board, and then through the continued development process, through a writer's room, through production, through casting, frankly, like I think all of this changes, right? Like you have this blueprint for what the show is, and then you actually put humans into those roles, and they respond to the material that you have on the page, or a director brings something to it and you're like, wow, I didn't realize that that's how it was going to be expressed, which makes me feel like I have to go a different way with it. All of that is possible. It's all subject to change, but coming forward with something that's compelling and you can stand behind for the purposes of the pitch, I think is huge and essential. Yeah, I think I kind of hit on these in previous conversation, in previous slides, but we talked a little bit more about the teaser, and if people want to talk more about if that approach is appropriate for kind of what they're doing, happy to, and then kind of hit on the protagonist piece. So I know that's a lot, and it's kind of broadly defined, but I mean, I say this in all sincerity, the questions that get asked in these presentations are just so incredible and so thoughtful. And just like such a great reflection of who you guys are as artists and thinkers. Just figured we would stop it there and just open up the floor.
I just had one quick question on if you're doing multiple seasons.
Mm-hmm.
Would you recommend rather to pitch one season and kind of keep where you would see multiple seasons going for the Q&A, so that you don't get too distracted and too far into the future?
I think my personal feeling, and Jordan, jump in if you feel differently. I feel like you could always pose it as a question, right? You could get to a stopping point and say, like, you know, you'd either reading the room or just asking directly, like, would you like to hear more about where the other seasons go? And look, a lot of times people out of politeness will just say yes, even if they've already kind of made up their mind. But I think that, again, unless you're talking about like a seasonal anthology, or even if you are, where like there's something kind of thematically binding all of these things, like American Horror Story, but it's a different set of characters and story each season. But there's, again, something thematically that kind of brings them all together. Unless that's the case, I think I think asking, but then also having those subsequent seasons as kind of tidily reduced and as succinct as possible. So again, you're not, or that you're expressing them in terms of kind of like very broad kind of turns, plot turns or character turns, and not like for those subsequent seasons, you're just not spending the same amount of time that you would on a first season with like, I think probably a couple rare exceptions.
It's like that simplicity and making sure that you're prepared.
Yeah. and again, like, as you said, like if they really like this, our decision on this hangs in the balance based on what happens in season 3, then they're going to ask you for it. And you'll have it prepared, but it shouldn't be something that you have to volunteer at the expense of making the pitch longer and denser.
But Clayton, isn't there also an implicit presumption that you're going to get through the first season to the next? So there's a certain kind of an edge to that in itself, which they might take exception to. I mean, maybe I'm being oversensitive.
Wait, so say that you're saying that there's the expectation that the first season in its entirety is pitched?
Yeah.
I suppose so. I mean, look, it depends. Like I think most of the elements that we've talked about apply to pitches writ large, but also this is through the prism of what we do at Scott Free, which is for the most part serialized dramatic television. So not sitcoms, not procedurals, though we've done those before. But yeah, I mean, I think there is the expectation of the first season. I thought the question was about subsequent seasons. Okay, yeah. But again, for me personally, I don't want a super plot heavy first season recitation. Like I want to know character arcs and again, signposts, plot signposts. But I don't like I know that we're not having the conversation about the series document, a deck, a presentation deck. In our work with Mondi, he put together kind of a roadmap for us, which I thought was great because it kind of spoke to the first season, albeit from the perspective of like the character arcs. That's how I personally always want it. Like, even if we are talking about a deck, the decks that then go into elaborate, here's episode 3, 4, 5, 6, like that may be the expectation of certain people. I personally dislike those. That's plot. That's not kind of theme, character, story. It's like that. Also, they become so dense. That's like that section of the deck is usually when the executive who's on the fence or maybe not feeling it, just like throws it in the trash. In my opinion, I could be wrong.
No, you're right. I mean, there's nothing more kind of mind numbing than reading just pages and pages of plot. Yeah. And I think when you share that too much plot with a buyer and you go into like episode 3 and episode 4, it removes the thing that they're going to want to have, which is a handprint on the creative. If you keep it simple and you keep it broad, then they can start to use their own imagination as you're pitching and as they're contemplating taking your pitch on about what elements they may want to bring to bear onto the piece that makes it unique for their particular wants and needs at that buyer. So it's a delicate balance between you want to give them enough to understand the show, but you don't want to over explain or give them everything, because then they're like, well, then what are we going to do?
That's a really good point. The other thing I'll say, Seton, I'm also presuming that this is the pitch of like, hey, this is the first, you're hearing this for the first time, or we're deciding whether or not we're going to buy it. There is a natural step in the development process after something has sold and set up, right? Like we'll just use the Terror, for example. It's like, okay, so they bought that project, they commissioned a script, Dave wrote the script, they loved it. He did a format document that kind of spoke to some of this stuff. But there will be always a juncture if the next step is opening a writer's room or going into production, where the network will say like, okay, now you have to pitch me the entirety of the first season in more detail. I think that is obviously it's required in order to advance from a script to something else. But if we're talking about like, hey, am I as a Amazon executive going to commission a script based on this pitch? I personally feel like there isn't as much kind of necessity for a super detailed season one.
So guys, thank you so much. What I just wanted to check, you were talking about episodic and not really going into detail with the episodic. Is that just for the pitch? Is that okay for like the treatment and stuff, or?
I mean, again, it's like, yes, I think for the most part, it is the pitch. As I was sharing, I do have some personal hesitation about getting overly dense in a presentation deck, but this is where it becomes very subjective and kind of hard to prescribe without being inside kind of the project. Like I'm not sure what kind of project you're doing and how essential knowing kind of, the episode breakdowns is to being able to appreciate the series. I mean, there's something to be said. Maybe this is, to play counterpoint to my answer to Seton, like there's certainly something to be said for providing that information such that it demonstrates, the series and you have an idea. There's a utility in that. But I think Jordan's point is also appropriate, like about them having their handprints on it. And also I think the same approach applies if you were leading with a series deck or the deck accompanied the pitch or whatever, which is like you want them leaning in and engaged, and you want to put out enough information there to demonstrate you have a handle on the bigger moves and the characters and kind of thematically what the essence of the show is. But like, I don't think that someone would fall in love with the characters, with the tone, with the why are we doing this and who it's coming from, and then be like, well, wait a second, like I love all those things, but like they don't know what episode 3 is. Like, I just don't think that's gonna happen.
I've never had it happen. And whether as a creator you want to do that work on your own to back into what your pitch may be,
that's right.
That's fine. Like that may be work that you just have on hand, but I haven't ever asked for that outside of what Clayton was describing in terms of that last step before production where the network will ask you to walk through all the episodes, but they'll give you guidance. Like they'll tell you, I want it to be, I've got 2 hours. I want you like, so it's not something you're going to not have a parameters for. But I have to say, like in all the time I've done this, I rarely, if ever, have asked for or wanted any long, page by page, episode by episode breakdown. It just fatigues you. Keep in mind, everyone you're going to share this with, whether it's a producer or a studio or a network, they have lots and lots and lots of projects. So they can't, you have to make sure that you're keeping in mind, you don't want to fatigue those people. Because they have to manage their own time, and they're often managing 20 projects or more on any given day. So you don't want to overburden them unless they ask for it, unless they specifically say, I want this.
Oh, that's perfect. Thank you so much.
When you're pitching, do you bring up the budget of your film? Do you just let it slide?
I think with very few exceptions, it's not really required or appropriate on the TV side. And certainly it wouldn't be the expectation of any of you. Now, like, I think occasionally we'll get we go out there with Ridley attached to like a huge book, and it's like total world creation. And we're with like some kind of like third party financier. We're like, either we're representing ourselves as Scott-free, the studio, that is going to put this together, or we're with A24 or someone else that's going to deficit finance the series. If that's the configuration, there's a Ridley component, there's like just what it is, scope and scale. And we're saying to them, hey, we're in this room with you, and the expectation is some kind of advanced commitment. It's like ordering a pilot, or ordering a series, or ordering a room. Like, if that's the expectation from our side, maybe there's some budgetary conversation that's a part of this pitch on the television side, but for the most part, this isn't really the venue for that.
I think it all depends on what the pitch is, especially when you're going to places in terms of laying out that budget range. I mean, I think so much of it is contingent on these things is based on cast and who the director is as a whole. So that's going to sort of shape what it's going to be. But I think ballpark, that's something that obviously you would discuss with the producer before as to what it's going to be and more or less where the range could be. I don't think there's any specific number, and it's always sort of a random configuration as to where it would be. But I think it's still trying to put it in a box that would have it succeed, whereby they would want to take it on. So I don't think anyone's budgeting anything because there's nothing really to budget before, but just knowing what the comps are and other things as well will help sort of shape where it would be in terms of obviously success to get made.
I mean, that's the other like kind of important concept, maybe too rudimentary, but like there are budget projections, there's estimations, there's a range, but to truly budget something, you actually need a script. You need the material. So if that is the question, like it's kind of, cart before the horse if there isn't even something that could technically be budgeted.
Something else to just quickly add on to, I think, especially in a film pitch, if a buyer is going to ask that question, the filmmaker is really not going to answer that question. It's going to be the producer. So it's not like a number you specifically need to have in your head. It's something a producer can either set the table with in the middle of a pitch. Sometimes it's the day before the pitch. Sometimes it's a follow-up after the pitch, but it's not really a filmmaker's responsibility to get into it.
So I had a conversation with Abby X actually a while ago back on set. Shout out to Abby. Shout out Race Bubbles. And we were sort of speaking about pitching and this idea of comps and making comparisons to different and currently already made projects. And you guys sort of touched on this idea of doing that as in terms of tone. But when does it become, like, how do you navigate that in a way where you don't make it too, overt or too distracting, where you present them with this sort of comparison and suddenly you're like, oh, I want to make this sort of sci-fi Star Wars fusion type of piece, and suddenly they've switched off immediately before even being able to, because they're like, oh, another.
I mean, that's an amazing question. I think it's a little bit circumstantial. I mean, I can say anecdotally, we're developing a project right now with an Indian filmmaker who's never done television before, and it's a adaptation of a graphic novel that's like kind of using vampirism as a metaphor for colonization. And it is of the scope and scale. It's like, it's real history with Hindu mythology and English vampires. And in his pitch, he said Game of Thrones 300 times because he was trying to communicate the essence and the scale. And it really worked against us. And some of that is specific to Game of Thrones, which again, like was a very watershed moment in television and became, kind of like the code for like, this is going to be spectacle, or this is going to be filmmaking television, or however you want to think about it. But kind of to your question, it became so distracting because it's not Game of Thrones. Like he's a super talented filmmaker, but David Benioff had he published multiple books. He had an Oscar either statue or nomination. They had this amazingly robust book series, and they had an HBO budget. So it's like I personally kind of feel like, oh man, stop referencing Game of Thrones about everything. That was such a special circumstance. So I know that's, you weren't asking specifically about that show, but I do feel like there's a tendency for people to use that as kind of like a crutch. I kind of feel like if it's helpful to just like express once the scope, the scale, the ambition, or maybe there's kind of like a method of storytelling, then maybe it's like, it's fine to use, but I would just say, I would use those references sparingly and not in a way where I think so what you're getting at is like, then people are just like, well, this just sounds like a lesser version of something that someone's already done before.
Yeah, I think on the film side, I think it's a similar sort of thing. Again, in that crutch, I think it's just to sort of help contextualize it, but it's not using it as sort of that reference that's always needed in that way. And so I think as a whole, again, people probably don't want to make the lesser version of something else too, and as a whole. So I think whether it's something in a storytelling technique or a world build or whatever it is, then using that just as a quick sort of thing to sort of, it's kind of in this vein, but it's different because of X, Y, Z. That way also can make clear how at least you're trying to go and build that film in a different way. But it kind of can give them at least a sense of whether it's thematics or again, that setting or whatever it may be, just to sort of help them familiarize themselves at least more or less where it would live. But at the same time too, you're obviously pitching what would be different, and why it makes your own thing.
I was going to use Game of Thrones especially as well, because it's like these really popular big shows that have these huge budgets and these really big cultural moves, and it's like you use them as a reference and they have so much attached to it that it's like immediately there's no looking away from Game of Thrones and the Lannisters and all of the stuff that they already established without even considering the story that you're going with. So it's just trying to find that balance.
Totally.
I kind of learned a soft rule when I was in commercial pitching, where like my producers were like, never include in your material anything that's of your like local contemporaries. Does that rule follow through? Are you wanting to steer away from anything that's like too current or too close to like the current things you're pitching? Or is there not really the same opportunity cost in film and television where like, no, they're not going to hire someone else to fill the slot? Like the project you're pitching ideally creates the slot.
I don't think it's hard and fast. I don't think it applies the same way, at least in television, as it might in the commercial space. But again, I think there's probably an expectation that if you were to do that, again, like you wouldn't use it, that you would use those kind of connections or references sparingly. The other thing, like kind of when you're talking about this meets that or this through the prism of that, like, I think that's sometimes effective. I'm trying to remember like some of the better ones that I've heard recently, but if you were saying like it has the intimacy and the character focus of a normal people, but it's set in the world of something like an entirely other genre, or like it's the filmmaking style of such and such contemporary, but that's not really my storytelling. Like I think if it's offset against something else that is like either a mashup or a deviation, but I maybe part of your kind of commercial producer's advice was like, don't put a contemporary out there that whose approach you're either emulating or has an approach that's so similar to yours that again you feel like there isn't a natural distinction drawn in even you supplying it as a reference.
I think you have to be really specific. I think you have to Clayton's point. You have to, if you're gonna reference something like it's autobiographical, like I May Destroy You, but it has the tone of Royal Tenenbaums. Like I think you have to always qualify it and be specific to what it is that you are referencing, instead of just being like, it's Lord of the Rings meets Breaking Bad. It's like, what the hell does that mean? Like you have to really, really show your audience what that means. That said, particularly with tone, comps are very helpful because, if a show has a particular sense of humor, if it's particularly quirky, or if it's very earnest and, that's where it becomes really helpful, but you just got to be real specific about why you're dropping that reference in.
Clayton, just very quickly, sorry, Sam, carry on.
Same for film, just be specific as to what that is, because again, you're saying these two different things and they can be interpreted in so many different ways. So I think it's trying to contextualize what it would be, because people have different reactions to different shows. And sometimes people don't even see some certain things too. So I think, again, it's being specific will be helpful.
Just a quick one, and that is the point that you raised, Clayton, about, or the story you told was just a horrifying story about your Indian colleague, because we all hear that and I could just feel the chills going up my spine, But one of the things that would be interesting just for you guys to touch on very quickly is interpersonal psychodynamics and the balance of power in any given situation, because obviously the person to whom you are pitching isn't as sensitive to where that person's coming from, as the person where they're coming from should be in relation to who they're pitching to. Sorry, that sounds very tortured. But if you could just touch on
psychodynamics, though, that's I've never heard that before.
Let's take this to the next plane.
Yeah.
Do it, Stephen.
But it's just so interesting that, because we have to think when we're pitching, but to what degree do we then constantly mediate our pitch to keep the person happy or to make sure we're keeping their attention? You know what I mean? As opposed to just really giving of your heart and soul, as that Indian guy was doing, just punching it out and giving everything he had and using.
Well, I have to say, in the case of that, that was a breakdown in preparation. He went fully off script. He had gone through the pains of finding references beyond Game of Thrones, and then he threw out the game script ahead of the match. Like it was that was kind of what happened there. It wasn't necessarily like, I mean, he did as a result lose the people on the other side. But there's only so much that you can do, I think, to kind of modulate or save that. And the psychodynamics are I mean, we also then have to like do the subset conversation about the psychodynamics of Zoom versus being in a room where you're like actually capable of reading like the body language cues. And, you know, there's in an instance where we were in person, I think there's plenty of times where we as producers would have the advance heads up about the executives and their temperament. And it's like, okay, well, that's the guy that's going to say yes or no, but he's never going to even listen to you. So you should talk to her because she's going to influence him after the meeting. So like, if you've got a good thing going with her, it kind of doesn't matter that he's the most senior person in the room or whatever.
We had people fall asleep at pitches.
Yeah, exactly.
Like, don't pitch after lunch because everyone's real sleepy. Like the 3 o'clock pitches.
Yeah, there's stuff like that. There's the psychodynamics that can be controlled are maybe the logistical variety, right?
Preparation.
Don't pitch on a Friday afternoon.
There you go. Another good one. Another good rule of thumb.
Preparation. It's like an actor. If you know your lines inside and out, then you can improvise. Then you'll have the mental space to really like read the room and all of that. But if you're not prepared, that's where things get all like goofy, because then your nerves and all that can get the best of you, and all of a sudden you're saying Game of Thrones 30 times. You know, like, so I think it's really, really, really important to be prepared. You don't have to have a memorized script. That's not what I mean by that. But you should have a really clear idea, like on a bullet point level, what you need to cover. And again, your producers will step in and you know, fill in the blanks if you happen to miss something. But yeah, I think the way to be able to both pitch and read the room really is about preparation.
Yeah, it's also everyone's kind of said this without really saying it, and whether it's the right approach from buyers to take or not. If you give a weak pitch, they're going to assume that you will not be able to write the script that well. Even if you're an incredible writer and just not a fabulous pitcher, that's just what they're going to assume. So you want to be prepared, because your preparedness indicates that you will be able to write the script and tell the story.
You mentioned a really interesting point about saying send the email ahead of time. I can't remember if it was about budget or you know, just to say I'm really enthusiastic and this is the reasons why we're in the pitch. And I guess I'm curious about maybe some of the practices or processes within which someone actually gets to the point of making a pitch. And we all know that, you know, cold calls definitely don't really do that, and it's largely relationships. But what does that look like, and what are the certain circumstances that help you actually get to the point where we are saying these pitches?
I mean, I think if I'm answering the question properly, I think, well, one slightly self-serving response to that is like that is why you as a writer or creator potentially would seek out the help of a producer, and we can talk about, like, you know, as in past discussions, there have been conversations about like, how do I get my foot in the door? How do I get representation? How do I get someone to kind of back and vouch for my material or me as like a legitimate creator? That's kind of separate, but like that is the the process, I think, starts with identifying kind of your partners and your supporters, and that many times will take the shape of a producer. Or if you have representation, or you have a manager, you have, or even if you don't, but you have friends in your kind of inner circle whose kind of taste and feedback you trust. It's start building it with someone else. Or you could also do it entirely by yourself and get it very far along, and then we can have, and then it's the kind of circumstantial question of like, how do you actually get it in front of someone that can say yes or no and advance it to a paid piece of development. But yeah, I think it's just a matter of trying to find. I mean, we hear most of the pitches, or all of the pitches that we hear are, hey, such and such writer has this idea, but they need to find their team, and you guys are where we want to start building the team. And so that's to kind of hit on something that I mentioned in the opening. Like we hear like the very early versions of that in many instances have like missing information and like missing sections. We hear stuff super early, a log line, a character. Obviously, the further along, the more helpful it is for us to evaluate. But sometimes there's a writer, a creator, a piece of talent that we're just so not desperate, we're so excited to be in business with. And it's like, oh, it doesn't matter. Like, that person could come to us with just like the sketch of a theme and like a character loosely in their mind. And we would say like, let's try to figure this out together. Or if someone's a complete unknown and it's more of a flyer or a risk we're taking, then the expectation would be that there is more work by which to make an evaluation. Does that answer your question, or is that like?
Yeah, framed it in a really interesting way, and I guess you also said something that was interesting to me, and I don't know if anyone else is interested in this question, and maybe the team can say yes or no. But you said, there's a different question on the side of this, which is how do you get people to see you and back you as a legitimate creator? And you kind of mentioned that there's a different answer to that, and I don't know if people are interested in hearing the answer to maybe what you'd say there.
I mean, I would say, I have to imagine the challenge of someone that is doesn't have representation or has yet to even build a reputation for themselves as an artist, as a creator. I think there's going to be more expectation on that person to have a body of work, right? Like, I think the pitch, if an agent or a manager or some third party comes to me and says, hey, I'd really like to hear a pitch from such and such person, they're going to tell me the log line, they're going to tell me like little synopsis. But where I always want to start is, well, tell me more about who this is coming from, right? And maybe the person has an extraordinary story. They've written very few things, but they had a whole other life that informs an experience, or they're coming at it from a different way. It's like, we've seen all the extreme versions. Like, this person used to be a spy and now he's become a screenwriter, or, she was the dean of Harvard Law and now she's decided to but apart from that, I think if you're just trying to get your foot in the door and you're trying to convince someone at the pitch stage, you're going to need to have a body of work. And to me, in television, that is like an original sample or two that the person that's saying like, hey, will you read, or will you hear Augusta's pitch? And I'll say, I'm totally open to it, but please send me something that she's written so I can understand her work and how she would execute the thing that she would pitch. That's kind of so I don't know that it totally answers your question, but I think in order to get to the place where you want someone to be able to say confidently yes or no to what you're proposing, it's kind of, to Rebecca's point, it's like, everyone on our side is going to be thinking about it through the prism of can they execute on the idea they're presenting. And the best way to demonstrate that is with work that speaks to your ability to execute.
The few times where I've been in a situation where I've had to pitch or was approaching a pitch or, you know, whatever, submitting something, I've always struggled with having to marry, I guess, the creative idea with the fact that you are approaching a business that has a business model that's trying to, at the end of the day, make a profit. So I guess for me, the issue is, specifically, I guess, with my project, for those who don't know, it's a very personal project. It is autobiographical in a lot of ways. And I find it very difficult. It's twofold. One, I find it very difficult to sort of walk into a room and to sort of have something that is so personal and so autobiographical and to sort of speak to it in a pitching kind of way, because I feel like, firstly, I'm commodifying my emotions and my real life experiences, and then I just sort of feel like a schmuck who's trying to make a buck from, you know, my life. And then also I feel like they're educating me, thinking we're not here to finance your therapy. You know, go and somewhere else.
But I'm sure Jordan and Sam and Rebecca have thoughts on this as well. My immediate thought is it's not your responsibility to commodify it. It's your responsibility to tell a good story. And their job is to figure out, now there's something in there, like the demographic breakdown, that I think that's not an appropriate thing for you to speak to. However, having, you know, if you have an opinion about, you know, who you think the audience for this would be, that's slightly different than like feeling the responsibility of going in there and saying like, and this is going, and I know that you guys care about the 18 to 34 demo on your network. Like that's not your responsibility.
I know you guys like young people, whatever, you know.
But if part of your intent is that there is a generation of viewers that you were trying to speak to in kind of in your approach, and that's important, and that's a part, like, I want the storytelling to be, you know, it's my execution, the approach on the storytelling is meant to reach an audience of X, and you know, and if you have an opinion or an expertise about, again, especially if you're a part of that generation, right? Or part of, if you as the creator are part of the audience that you were trying to reach, and part of what you're saying is there's not enough television or there's not enough stories for this section of people or this generation, like, I think that's appropriate. But I don't think you have to take something that in the case of your project is very personal and reduce it into kind of like some kind of quantified commodity language that they know how to ingest. That's their job, is to hear a good story and say like, okay, I know how this could be really good for us. Does that make sense?
And then I think on the therapy side, I mean, you're telling a personal story, but ostensibly your story is universal to other people in the audience, right? Like telling a coming of age story. Yeah, it may be about like my particular version of that story, but embedded in a personal story usually is like universal themes, things everyone can relate to, even if they're not X, Y, and Z. They've felt this emotion. They've had this kind of trauma in their lives. Like we watch shows all the time that we've not actually experienced those things, but we are able to find common ground in the human emotional part of it. So I think it's always important as a creator who's doing something autobiographical to kind of speak to the fact that, yes, this is my experience, but this is experience that people in Gen Z have. I think you trying to kind of take the personal and make it universal and relatable is part of connecting with your audience. So I think it's important to kind of, yes, you can speak in specifics, and you should always, if it's autobiographical, you shouldn't shy away from that. But I think to stay away from this idea of like it's just, you want to continuously kind of show your pitching audience that, yes, there's an audience for this, because I'm speaking to, the pain of growing up or a breakup or one's familial relationships or whatever those are, that everyone kind of understands, even if they've not experienced your particular version of that.
I think that's totally right. Look, in the case of yours, Mondi, it's like, you know, there's an amazing mother-son story there that to Jordan's point is universal. And even if that's not everyone's relationship with their mother, they can identify with that. And so, you know, the furthest I would go for you would be framing it in that way. Like, here's a mother-son story, but with specific characters and specific circumstances whose specificity is going to be what makes the show interesting and different, but dealing with this theme and approach that a lot of people can relate and connect to.
Yeah, I think also as well. Oh, sorry, Cece.
No, I was just thinking, just to underline what Clayton's really saying is, you know, Jung defined the archetype as a psychic manifestation of habitual thought forms, you know, and that's really what it's about, is to get outside of yourself and find things that resonate, because you're ultimately looking for bridges to pitch to, you know, to the person to whom you're pitching. You're looking for stepping stones to them, you know. So you have to find those big things. So you really got to just not overthink it, to my way of thinking, and you got to step outside of yourself. So there's a degree to which one can become quite self-absorbed, just given your passion and your involvement in what it is you're trying to share. And in some respects, you've got to just stand back and almost put yourself in the shoes of the person to whom you're sharing, or with whom you're sharing your story as well, you know.
But also, I also feel like it's also perhaps touching on the point that we've been speaking about throughout these Zoom sessions, also about vetting, where perhaps not only are we being vetted, but also obviously we should vet them, because I think there are some places where you walk into the room and go, I really shouldn't be talking to you people. Not because you guys won't get it, but also this is not the home for this particular story. And for me to try to convince you is actually working against me. You know, I should perhaps try somewhere else. I think also that would have helped a lot if I had done that prior.
That's important. I mean, I mean, we and Clayton talk about this all the time. It's like, you know, there are probably 20, I mean, all told, maybe 20 places you could take a TV show and drama across broadcast, cable, streaming, blah, 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 blah. 2 or 3 of them may be right, you know, and maybe 2 or 3 of them might be an outlier, but you want to take a shot. Like the job of your producing partners is to educate you about the marketplace, so that you're not doing this pitch 20 times, fatiguing yourself, you know, wearing yourself out, losing enthusiasm for your own material because you said it so many times.
This is a matter.
You have to be judicious about pitching, because it's a very stressful process. And you don't want to go through that stress if there's literally no chance. Like, you know, there are projects of ours that we're like, there's no way so-and-so is going to buy this. So like, let's not bother. You know what I mean? So it's our job in a lot of ways to help you avoid those meetings where you're literally like, where you're talking in Spanish and they're talking in German, and like nobody, this is never going to happen, because it's no good for you. Like, you know, it's not good for your experience. And
the other thing that I think Jordan and I have gotten in a habit of doing this in all of our meetings, in all the pitches that we hear, particularly the ones that we like and want to pursue. We always put it back to the writer or the creator and say, what's important to you in a partner? Because it is a two-way street, and maybe not every producer will take this kind of philosophical position, but it's like, we don't want to fight for something or come on board something where we feel like there's a better match for the writer or the creator elsewhere. Like that's doing the project a disservice. And yes, we're in a business, and this isn't like charity work that we're doing, but at the same time, it's like, to your point, Mondi, it's like if there isn't good collaborative vibes, and that can even be expressed or manifested in how people are seeing it. Like if you're hearing, you know, like red flag words like merchandising and stuff, you're just like, wait a second, you're probably not the partner I'm looking for in this moment. So it's something that we're very conscientious of. And it should be the expectation of all of you guys. Like I would hope that any producer that was hearing from you would give you some opportunity or venue for you to elaborate on what's important to you all on a partnership level.
I would just like to ask a question based on a project I'm currently developing. The project that I'm doing is an Indigenous language project, right? And I did my research, and the population that fully comprehends this language is like less than 15%, right? So I'm just wondering whether that is somewhat of a red flag for potential producers. Do they look at this and think, okay, X amount of people are going to watch this? Is that off-putting? And if it is there a way I can kind of spin it using universal themes, et cetera, will that work?
Oh, wow. Great question. And again, I think it's subjective, and I wouldn't want to venture as far as to say red flag, but I would say that you have to look at the places that have done either multilingual, or like, I think when it comes to the language in which a show, the language, I mean, it just kind of depends who you're pitching to, and if they have a history or a past of having ventured into that space, and this is where like a producing partner or an agent or someone that could help you understand the landscape you're going into. I mean, if that is an essential element and identity of the essence of the show, then that's what it is. Like, in my opinion, I think you have to be realistic about the marketplace you're going into, and what the likelihood is that someone might want to go for that. And I know that's like kind of what you're asking right now, like, will someone go for that? It's tough to say, and hopefully this doesn't feel like too broad or a cop-out answer. I mean, I feel confident enough to say that like 15 years ago, the answer would be no, you can't do that. Or I wish you could do that, but people aren't doing that. I think there's a greater openness for specificity in terms of culture, in terms of language, in terms of multiple languages. I mean, I just know anecdotally from our work with the Apple International Group, it's like they're going to release a couple shows that will be multilingual, and will be mostly subtitled English. So there's, I think it's a frontier that is expanding, but kind of impossible to give a blanket answer unless anyone on my side feels like that's.
I wonder, just because I don't know a lot about the country of South Africa, but my understanding is there's many languages spoken there. And so, I would imagine it's specific to particular markets because audiences are going to have a more familiarity with translations and subtitles in a way that, like, I would say the United States is probably the lamest and least adventurous in this regard, because we're not accustomed to multilingual programming. We don't live in Europe, for instance, where you'll see a Dutch show on French television and an Italian show on UK television. So I think it can be very specific to the particular market that you're in. But I think Clayton's assessment in terms of the global market and the American market is right on target. I just don't know. I just don't know enough about your home market to know if that's a problem or not.
And I think on the film side, I think it's somewhat similar. But again, I think that there's people that, obviously different language films get made everywhere. So it's a matter of just finding whatever that central story is. And potentially there's a producer that would be willing to put up the money in, as we've seen even over the years too, in terms of the openness for the world as a whole to watch foreign films with obviously subtitled print. I think that it is possible. It's just a matter of finding, again, whoever those people in your corner would be to try and find the money to make it happen. So, it feels like it's probably more so in a independent space, as to where that would be on the feature side, but it all depends on sort of how, even in these other previous sort of talks as well, in terms of how to find the funds and the team. But I think first and foremost, there can be, it's just a matter of how it would be put together.
And that universality still applies, like in any instance, no matter if it's autobiographical or specific to a particular culture, or, like the more a filmmaker can orient the audience to the particular culture they're in so that they can draw analogies to their own lives and engage with it emotionally, the better. I mean, there are all sorts of fantastic foreign films and television shows we've all watched where we've kind of gone, I'm not sure, is this, how does the family structure work in this country, or how do the police operate? And once you understand that, and if the filmmakers kind of give you that orientation, then you're kind of along for the ride. I mean, I watched a fantastic Indian language series called Delhi Crime on Netflix about a very famous case there. And I don't know the first thing about how the Indian police operates relative to the American police, but I was very quickly oriented in terms of those questions, and also kind of who I was really going through this ride with, and understanding that character. And then it kind of didn't matter that it was another language, and it didn't matter as a police force. I'd never, I wouldn't know what their justice system looks like. I was on for the ride. So I think it is important to always find those universal kind of touch points emotionally, but also to orient your audience to the world that they're in, so that they can understand the mores, the kind of like why people behave the way they do.
Sam, I was gonna ask, would this apply for an alien language to, like, on my film that I'm writing? Would this apply for that as well?
Sorry, you said that one more time?
An alien
would
language.
This apply? Yeah. An alien language. Would this apply on that film as well, on Ozarks, the film that we piece with?
Yeah, I mean, look, I think in terms of the the bill, it's just as Jordan said, it's that same way. If it's even a made up, language too, it's creating the confines that it's believable and that you buy into the system as to whatever it is. So as long as it's established as to what the rules are and sort of how it's all working, then certainly I think as a whole, it's just a question of, again, then the question is it fully in one language? Is it going to be bilingual or something else as well? I think, again, it's just sort of setting this stage so that we know where we are so that it can work. I don't know if that answers your question.
Like what is the base, like substantial pitch document?
I mean, I think there's sort of pre-COVID and during COVID, and we'll see when it goes back to how it looks at the future. I think sort of pre-COVID as a whole, you would be in the room and there might be note cards that you have to sort of keep you along, but it's not like you're reading a document to them. It's more so you're reciting and sort of, again, sort of telling them about what the movie or the TV show will be, sort of how we laid it out. Granted, it can be in different order than how we did it. Sometimes there's visual aids that you might have that you can flip through. Other ones might be a lookbook that you might leave behind. Sometimes there's no visual elements, but again, just how we laid it out is obviously it's, setting the table from the producers giving the thing, and then they turn it over to you, and you would go and pitch it through for those 20 minutes, and unless they had specific questions throughout, and then it would go to the Q&A to turn it over. So that's sort of how it was done pre-pandemic. Now during the pandemic, it's changed because we're on Zoom. So in some ways, there's more interactive things sometimes how we do it now with visual elements that you would walk them through. But it still is sort of the same essence of how it would still go. But in terms of even how these are too, in some ways, there's even been crazy examples where people pre-record the pitch and they just send it to the people. And if they want to hear more, then it's more of an informal Q&A afterwards after that, because it's just a way to go and saying, everyone's so busy. That was also a crazy, at least crazy time earlier on too, that you would record it, you'd send it out, and then people wanted to go and, wanted to pursue, then they can do it that way as opposed to, taking more of everyone's time in a way. So that was somehow people have done it that way now too, which, also people can watch it on their own time and sort of digest it. So that's sort of been a change. And I'm curious, even if in TV, if that's something that people are going to go ahead and even try and do going forward. But we haven't fully done that on the feature side, but we've definitely thought about it.
Yeah, I mean, it's to Sam's point, like COVID has changed a bunch, but even pre-COVID, I feel like the days of there being kind of a customary approach, I think are long gone. Again, which is why we kind of gave you the ingredients and not necessarily the instructions for the recipe, because they're, to use your cake metaphor, it's like there's the wedding cakes and the cupcakes, and like there's just and all of them can be tasty. Knowing what I know about the commercial world, where it sounds like you come from, that in my understanding has always been a bit more rigid and specific in terms of here's the format. This is what the expectation of a pitch deck is. here's, you know, this is who's pitching on your behalf. This is when you're pitching directly. Like, that's a little bit more, I think, standardized. It's wide open. And some of this, I think the other thing too, Sam touched on this before, I think knowing your strengths as a creator and knowing whether or not you excel kind of in a pitch venue is also important. I mean, I think what we're encouraging is that all of you get the kind of the practice and the repetition and put the preparation in such that you can be as good as you can possibly be. But like, you know, let's also not lose track of kind of the weird perversity of like, you know, like at the end of the day, what I'm looking for in finding like a script or finding a scripted project is a brilliant writer. And that person is not always going to be a performer or a pitcher, but then it becomes that person's responsibility to figure out how to communicate their talents, if not kind of in a verbal pitch venue. And so, you know, it's like there's a couple writers that we've worked with over the years, and we've taken pitches out with them, and we know how talented they are on the page. And they just get in a room, and, you know, despite all of our efforts to help them with their preparation, it just like, they just don't have it because it's a gene, it's a skill set, it's a quality that not every writer has. But that's not necessarily a reflection of their kind of creative talents. But in those instances, then you have to think like, okay, well, maybe I'm not a natural pitcher, maybe I'm not great in this setting, or I'm not there yet. So I'm going to have to actually just write this script, and you know, then we can talk a little bit more about like, or I come from the commercial world. I'm very comfortable inside of pages or Keynote. I'm very comfortable expressing my ideas and my opinions, you know, graphically. And so I'm going to build my approach to pitching a television series relying on those skills. I think that's the other factor that should be taken into consideration here. It's like the end result should be a reflection of where you think your strengths lie.
Yeah, I definitely miss the in the room. Yeah, like the idea of like sending. Like we've had to like send off decks and then like hear back a week later. And that's the up to the fourth part of the process, which is breaking my brain. But something that I do want to ask you guys as well is, as a result of like the move to Zoom, and as bad as it is, as a result of sending the decks off, it's also changed how willing, like how the different types of representation that we've been able to access and look at. And because you guys are doing this on Zoom, does that mean that there's more that, like from a Scott-free perspective, it's easier for you guys to take on someone based in India or based in South Africa, because it's not necessarily like the season of them being in the room anymore?
For sure. I mean, there's absolutely a practical benefit in Zoom, and yeah, has allowed us, the same way you're describing for you, allowed us access to people that before, because you know, pitch calls are rough, and when geography is the limitation, or time zone or whatever, like when those have been past impediments, it is hard. So yeah, Zoom is definitely opened things up. And I'll be interested to see how long it takes for the pendulum to swing back towards people really demanding or desiring the in-person pitch. But right now, I think we've all grown kind of accustomed to it and are trying to remain positive and thinking about the benefits of Zoom as opposed to the things that are annoying about it.
No, just going back to the point of being new in the industry and trying to get known and connections. You were saying earlier that, Clayton, I think, you know, obviously if it's someone unknown, then you're less likely to go off a log line or an idea or a character and having a body of work. So does that mean not necessarily produced screen credit work, just like...
That's right. I mean, I think for me, it's, I'm not... In fact, when it comes to just reading material, I just want to read something I want to read something original, and there's not the expectation that like, oh, this is a script that there's a movie for someplace that I can go see. Like that's not the point. So yeah, it doesn't have to be produced written material.
Because I'm asking this because I'm at that stage where I'm trying, like taking that next step in my career and maybe starting a business name and getting funding and applying and all of that. And I'm finding time management is obviously a huge issue between researching and finding ideas and actually sitting down and writing and finding that balance. But would you say it is a worthwhile investment to take some time out and have like 2 or 3 scripts in the bag that's completed that you're happy with to show to people, so that you have that, and that it's worthwhile taking some time out to do that, and
absolutely.
putting it. I think it's for a bit. Yeah.
I think it's essential. I think the other thing you can think about if you're being kind of like business minded about it, or maybe not even business minded, but the other thing to think about, and I think this is important even for us, even as executives, is we all kind of have to look after our own careers and livelihoods. The other thing that I give some weight to, and I use some extreme examples of people that have like kind of, past experiences that make them distinct, but maybe even as an exercise, this doesn't necessarily have to apply to all of you, but like maybe as an exercise, write the bio for yourself, right? Like most sample material that comes to us by way of agencies or managers comes with like a little paragraph about about the person behind the material, right? And when you think about what that is, now for the the Steve Zalians and the Eric Roths of the world, like that bio is like a list of how many movies they've won Oscars on or whatever, but like for the emerging writer that has a sample or 2 and no produced credits, it has to then speak to the characteristics or the background or the temperament or whatever of the individual that so like again, like if this is all the other kind of component we didn't really talk to or speak to on this was what are people looking for, because it again, as you heard in the Rebecca and Jordan presentations, like it's become so niche, it's impossible to make a pitch that applies to everyone, all those things. But if I had to say at least one thing that everyone is going to be looking for, it's something that's fresh and distinct, right? It's something that feels special and apart from everyone else. So if you apply that same kind of thinking to yourself as an artist, what makes me special as a storyteller? How would I want to frame myself to the world? Like that could also be helpful, because for me personally, like those kind of experiences, how you distinguish yourself, how you're not, like your contemporaries, that's important. That I factor that in while I'm considering a piece of material.
If you've got multiple stories, I've heard about, and especially when you don't know the person that you're pitching to, and even to get to the point where you can pitch, I've heard of this one-pager that first gets looked at, and even before sending a one-pager, you kind of introduce yourself. So how could that work where you could send multiple ideas for stories, where you actually get to a point where you've got outlines for multiple stories, but you only have so many hours in a day? And
yes.
So I often try and keep my eye on the market and what's happening, and then you can often see trends or you anticipate stuff. But ultimately, it's nice to know, well, I should focus on this project and write that one, because then the next 3 can wait, because then they should be coming along. So
that's right.
Yeah, strategically, what would you
I think it's very circumstantial, and it definitely pertains to who you're talking to. So and why you're talking to that person. So there have been instances where I, as the producer, have gone to the representative and said, I really love such and such's work. I want to sit down with that person and just hear kind of what's kicking around in that person's head. And then they come in and they say like, oh, I've got like a handful of things. I haven't really gone far down the road with them. Can I just take you through just like, brief sketches of multiple projects? And then I'll say, in an effort to be in business with this person, yes, absolutely, take me through that menu. Now, conversely, if it's like, hey, you got to meet this writer, you don't know her, she's really talented, but just get in a room with her, or get on a Zoom, or get on a call. In that kind of setting, and this is where you kind of have to like read the room and understand the person that you're talking to. I personally don't think like running through kind of a menu is like a get to know you. I feel like it's only appropriate if it's invited or that's the expectation. But I think the other reason for that is like, as producers, as development executives, I think we're always trying to, going back to the humanity card or the passion, like we're always trying to identify what is the story that you have to tell. It's like I understand why we're talking to Mondi about Straight. Like I understand the significance of that story to him, and but I also know that he's got other stuff out there. But it's like, you know, if I heard kind of Mondi's list of projects that we could possibly, it's like, no, let's do that one because that one is important to you. It's your passion project. Like we're also looking for that. So I feel like the kind of menu of options or the lists, or like, let me tell you a little bit, a lot, like that's for like super trusted relationships or people that are soliciting you for like, let's find any way to be in business with. Otherwise, I think you're leading with what you're most passionate about, what you have to, the story that you have to tell. But maybe Sam and Rebecca or others have a kind of a different way of thinking about it.
I think that's spot on. You know, again, I think it's sort of knowing what that person more or less would be looking for. And if it is invited, then sure, then look at all those things as well. But I think so much of it is, again, knowing who you are as a person once you're there, because you know, those experiences or those things that you're going to go and want to write about will ring true in the text based on life experience and certain things too. So, you know, I think that's part of it. And again, even as Clayton said, like those bios are very helpful, and it's just fun sort of clips to at least guide us through certain questions that we might have too, in terms of those meetings. And even at the same time too, when we're running about our thing, you know, through the days, and, oh, I have a meeting with someone, I read this thing, oh yeah, this is going to remind me what they are and this is what they're doing. So it is helpful to sort of, again, even just set the table for those meetings.
So just going back to the process, this one is just a little bit personal. So Zakon and I, obviously, we wrote a script, we mentioned it some time ago, and we've been chatting to a producer that we know quite well, and basically—
Sorry, is it a film or a television show? Just
it's a film.
Okay.
Yeah, it's a film. And he's basically, so we set the table, you know, gave him a bit of an overview. It wasn't really a pitch, but it was more of like a discussion. And he's kind of asked for the script. And we are not sure if we're quite ready. And I don't know if we don't know if we're confident enough to send it. Do we just kind of send as soon as we feel ready, or what process should we take? And once he's gotten it, how long do we wait until we hear back? And, you know, just all that stuff, because we know he's really busy and he's really quite well known. And so we don't really want to waste his time. And we just want to make sure that it's all really good and, you know, worth his while. So it's just a bit of those nerves, like, yeah, so the process thereafter.
I totally get that too. And in terms of even sort of the pitch and whatnot, him wanting to read the script, that's totally, you know, reasonable in that way. I think he wants to see how it looks on the page. I would say though, in terms of, you know, him reading it and maybe his initial interest, like you're probably going to have that one shot with him reading it. So you do want to make sure the script is in the best place wherever you think it is. And whether it's, you know, getting reads from your peers or whoever else to give you notes. I mean, it's the same thing, I think, in general for, you know, if he is quite busy, as, you know, obviously like we are too, it's like, you really have that one shot to go and share that thing. And granted, there can be caveats in saying, hey, we're still looking to maybe do certain threads here or there. We're still trying to iron out a few things in specific areas. But I think you do want to get to the place where you're actually feeling really good about it, so that you can do, so that, you know, obviously you want him to come on board and be a part of it. So that's what I would think in terms of actually getting it to that place. And at the same time too, I guess I'm not sure in terms of it sounds like that's the thing, as opposed to him saying, I want to read a draft and I'll give you notes and do that. It sounds more like he wants to just read it that one time, correct?
Yeah, exactly.
Got it. So yeah, I would say then I would try and get it to the best place that you think it is. And then, he's going to read it. And then in terms of the turnaround time, I don't know how long it'll take him, probably a few weeks, but I would probably give him a couple weeks and then check in after that and see where he is at that point. If he's had a chance to read once you do send, but I always do think sort of leading with the best foot forward in terms of like, you're in a good place with it, but still knowing that there's some work to be done. You can highlight those specific areas, but I think the closer it is to where you're happy with it, then I think, I'm sure that will make it stand out against the pile of reading that he might have as well.
This feels like kind of the beginning of the end, but I'd like to suggest, and something that I'd like to start engaging with you guys, to look for a channel through which we can judiciously start looking at projects in an intelligent and a controlled and managed way that allows some of the absolute genius and some of the incredible quality and energy that's been like flying around here into a space where it can be appreciated and hopefully utilized. So I'd like to think it's just the end of the beginning with a bit of luck going forward, because I'm sure we can work something out.
Yeah, absolutely. This shouldn't be the end. This can be the end of the presentation series, but this should not be the end of the robust pathway between across the ocean or whatever. So let's keep it going.
Thank you.
Thank you so much.
Massive thank you.
Thank you.